Hello everyone, today we're talking about perspective, and the first step into being able to draw in perspective is the ability to draw boxes at any angle or position that you want to draw them. The reason why drawing boxes is so important is because you can use boxes to basically create scenes within them, or even just drawing single objects. So for my first example, the first way I started practicing was by drawing cupboards. The reason why I'm drawing cupboards is because when you have them open, you could see inside how deep it goes, and you could see the borders, which is basically the borders of whatever cube or box you'll be able to draw in the future from imagination. So this is just an example because for the past week I've just been using this practice to draw some examples for this video. So in this case, I drew my cupboard and I drew all the objects that were in the cupboard following the perspective that I had from the initial drawing of the box itself. So because you can see the inside lines, you can start following that as a guide, and you'll be able to get a good reference for when you try to draw from imagination. So for this next picture, I started by I wanted to draw a room, so I started by drawing my cube and making sure to draw through, and then started to place the objects in. But if you might notice, the proportions of things are all wrong and the perspective is wrong, so I started to do it again. This one I tried to draw a bit slower just to make sure I'm actually thinking while I'm drawing and not just like mindlessly sketching. Because this is practice, I want to make sure I consume all the information and like learn from what I'm drawing. So I'm drawing my guidelines. It's still not perfect. I'm still not using a ruler, but I'm making sure that everything stays in the perspective following the borders of the box that I gave it. Again, I'm drawing through to make sure that you can see like all the lines and use them as a guide. So first for the door, I drew down following the edges of the wall to get the door in good perspective, and then I did that same technique for the shelf right at the corner over there, and then doing the same thing for the floor mat and the bed. So you can see a line going across the floor part, and then I'm poking it upwards towards the ceiling to basically give the height of my bed. And I'm also using that to draw circles and more organic type shapes, so like the headboard in this situation. I'm also, for this, I'm using mainly two values. I'm trying not to make it too complicated because the main goal is to improve on my perspective. So my focus is figuring out how I can create guidelines for myself to make whatever image I'm interested in making. So for this picture frame, I started with my guidelines, but noticed that the frame itself didn't match proportionally, so I changed it up a bit. And now for this next one, it's actually an outdoor scene. So I'm still starting with the box and I'm drawing through, and I'm going to draw within the box itself. So using my basic shapes, I'm following the perspective to draw a castle because I was just interested in drawing castle, and drawing some trees more organically. You might notice that the mountain in the background looks a bit flatter because I was more thinking of it like it was a diorama, but as I started to shade it, I started to try to add more three-dimensionality, and I added a few more mountains in the back to show that the area goes deeper. Because this is an outdoor scene, I wanted to make sure it actually feels like it's an outdoor scene and not like a diorama like how it started when I was drawing. For the shading, it's just basic. I'm following the planes I want the light to go on. So the floor is horizontal while the walls of the building is vertical. And now on this next example, I'm trying to show that you can also use these techniques to draw organic things. In this case, it's a cow. I think it's a cow or it's a hippo. From my reference, I typed in cow, but it looked more like a hippo at the end. you might notice that I made the legs a bit too stubby, but I'm extending the box to the needs that I need it to be. I'm not trying to constrict myself to stay within the box. So I'm extending the box to make sure that proportionally everything looks correct, and it stays within perspective. So as you can see, I used my basic shapes to draw out the cow or hippo or whatever this is, and I'm drawing within the box, following my perspective, like making my basic shapes follow the perspective of the box too. And then I'm just doing my basic two-tone shading. Next is I started to draw a person, but in this case I messed up because I started to draw them and I forced myself to stay constructed within the box that I made, instead of extending my box to a way that it helps make the drawing look correct. And this is all proportional, like my eye is mainly looking at the proportions to make sure that the overall drawing looks correct. So in this case, the arms look too long, and the body just looks too short for the size of the head. So I did it again just to make sure I do it better than I did the last time, and used those mistakes that I made the last time as a way to improve on the current drawing. So I started with the head and I drew the box around the head so I can have a better idea of the proportions of the rest of the body. And as you can see, I use basic forms, spheres, cylinders, and cones to make this woman wearing a dress. And even the bottom part of the dress where it flares and goes in and out, I'm using the perspective I made on the cube. Even though I didn't draw the box all the way down to the bottom of the dress, I'm still using the edges of the box as a guideline to indicate like how those bends kind of look. So for the next drawing, unfortunately I lost the first few minutes of it, so it kind of just skips into a normal frame, like a thumbnail frame, and I have my cubes indicating the architecture or the buildings that are going to be in the drawing itself. But basically you can see just from the foreground like curvy shape, I drew outside of the box and made that, even though it's a 2D shape in the image itself, I made it more three-dimensional to make sure that the forms are actually showing. And then you can see like the bottom of the cubes to indicate the house. It kind of goes into the floor itself, just to show that this is a place that continues on. Because I did this like a normal method without like actually using a box to surround it, I'm just using basic one-point perspective going outside of the frame itself. But the best thing to do is to have a box and draw the lines inside the box to show the perspective that it should be. So on this next one, that's what I do. So I draw my box and I'm drawing the inside of the box like an X-ray vision to indicate how the object should be inside the box itself, and using it as a perspective guide. Because this is a basic still life I'm doing from reference, it's easy for me to place all my objects, and I'm just making sure that they have their own space, and using drawing through and making sure all the forms kind of match and all the proportions are right to make sure that not only does it look right in perspective, it just looks right as objects next to each other, instead of like looking all wonky and stuff. So this next drawing, I'm using the box correctly as a way to do some one-point perspective of a reference image of a train yard I found online. So the back, because it's a box, I'm not using that back wall as like a boundary. I'm just continuing to draw what would be past that horizon like wall, even though it doesn't make sense like within the box, but when you think about the front of the box as just your piece of paper and you're just trying to draw as much depth as possible, using that way it kind of helps. And I'm only using those like lines that going towards the middle as like guidelines for where my object lines go towards. So you can see there's this railway track and this train right here. I'm also using just my 2 shades to indicate like light and dark and to add a pattern so you can see where light's coming from. And you can see like the back of the city is just a few simple lines, but I'm using those a cube to basically make out a guide, and I'm doing that the same for this interior. This is a scene with a few characters, but I'm using the same techniques I used for the bedroom interior for this one too, and I'm making sure that the proportions are right and that all the lines are matching the guide I gave for using the exterior cube as a guide, like using my box as a guide. But that's about all I can say about this video. There's going to be a lot more perspective videos coming up of me just practicing the different versions of different techniques of perspective. And once I practice it and make a few videos on the different techniques, I'm going to make a more concise, more like guided video on perspective like I did for the shading one in the last week's video. So if you're interested in seeing more, you can like, and if you need any help, comment and subscribe. Thanks everyone for watching. Have a good day.